The rain fell steadily on the black umbrellas gathered around William Harrison's casket, each drop seeming to echo the collective grief of the 100-plus mourners who had come to say goodbye to one of the most respected CEOs in the tech industry. I stood at the back of the crowd, my dark suit soaked despite the umbrella, watching as speakers took turns sharing memories of a man who had been both my mentor and my closest friend for the past 15 years. William had built Harrison Technologies from a 3-person startup in his garage into a billion-dollar enterprise that employed over 8,000 people across 12 countries. But more than that, he'd built a culture of loyalty, innovation, and genuine care for the people who made the company's success possible. Standing there in the rain, listening to colleagues describe his vision and leadership, I felt the weight of knowing that his death marked the end of an era for everyone who worked under his guidance. "James?" a voice called from behind me. I turned to see Margaret Chen, the company's chief financial officer, approaching with her own umbrella. I wanted to express my condolences again. "I know how close you and William were." "Thank you, Margaret." "He was more than a boss. He was family." She nodded solemnly. "He spoke about you often in board meetings. Always said you were the future of this company." I managed a small smile. He believed in people, sometimes more than they believed in themselves. What Margaret didn't know, what none of the board members knew, was exactly how much William had believed in me. Over the past 5 years, through a series of carefully structured trust agreements and stock transfers, William had gradually transferred majority ownership of Harrison Technologies to me. It was part of his succession planning, he'd explained, a way to ensure that the company's values and vision would survive even if something happened to him. "The board has plans, you know," Margaret continued, lowering her voice. "Big changes coming, new direction for the company." "What kind of changes?" "Efficiency improvements, streamlining operations. Richard Blackwood has some very specific ideas about maximizing shareholder value." Richard Blackwood. The name made my stomach tighten. He was the newly appointed chairman of the board, a venture capitalist who joined Harrison Technologies' board just 8 months ago when his investment firm bought a significant minority stake in the company. William had been skeptical of Blackwood from the beginning, but the board had pressured him to accept the investment as part of an expansion strategy. "William always prioritized people over pure profit margins," I said carefully. "Yes, well, times change. The market demands results, and sentiment doesn't pay dividends." As the funeral service concluded and people began to disperse, I noticed several board members huddled together near the parking area, speaking in low voices and glancing occasionally in my direction. There was something about their body language, secretive, almost conspiratorial, that made me uneasy. Richard Blackwood stood at the center of the group, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of aggressive confidence that came from decades of corporate takeovers and boardroom battles. He caught my eye across the parking lot and nodded in my direction, but there was no warmth in the gesture. It felt more like a predator acknowledging prey. I'd been Harrison Technologies' chief operating officer for 3 years, after working my way up through the ranks over more than a decade. William had promoted me to the role specifically because he trusted my judgment and my commitment to the company's culture. But I'd always sensed that some board members viewed me as an obstacle to their vision of a more aggressive business strategy. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from William's personal assistant, Linda. "Mr. Blackwood wants to see you in conference room A tomorrow at 9 a.m., says it's urgent." I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the October rain. William had been buried less than 4 hours ago, and already the power plays were beginning. That evening, I sat in my study reviewing the documents William had given me 6 months earlier. Comprehensive legal papers that outlined my actual ownership stake in Harrison Technologies. 60% of all outstanding shares, transferred through a complex but entirely legal structure of trusts and stock options that had been carefully designed to avoid triggering disclosure requirements until activated. "This is your insurance policy," William had told me when he'd handed over the papers. "If anything happens to me, if the board tries to change the fundamental nature of this company, you have the power to stop them. But James, use it wisely. Great power requires great responsibility." I'd hoped I'd never need to use that insurance policy. But as I read Linda's text message again, I began to suspect that tomorrow's meeting would change everything. Conference room. A felt different without William's presence. For 15 years, this had been where major company decisions were made, where strategic planning sessions shaped the future of thousands of employees, where William's voice had guided every important conversation. Now, the room felt cold and sterile, dominated by people who viewed Harrison Technologies as numbers on a balance sheet rather than a community of innovators. Richard Blackwood sat at the head of the table, William's chair, flanked by 3 other board members. Margaret Chen, whom I'd spoken with at the funeral, David Winters, the former CEO of a consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring, and Patricia Morse, a venture capitalist who joined the board when Blackwood's firm invested in the company. "James, thank you for coming," Blackwood said without standing or offering to shake hands. "Please sit down." I took a seat across from them, immediately noticing that this felt more like an interrogation than a meeting among colleagues. "We wanted to speak with you about the future direction of Harrison Technologies," Blackwood continued. "As you know, the business environment has become increasingly competitive, and we need to make some significant adjustments to ensure the company's continued success." "What kind of adjustments?" Margaret opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. "We've engaged McKinsey & Company to conduct a comprehensive operational assessment. Their preliminary findings suggest significant opportunities for cost reduction and efficiency improvements." I scanned the documents, my heart sinking as I read phrases like redundant management layers, excessive employee benefits, and underperforming divisions. This wasn't operational improvement. It was systematic dismantling of everything William had built. "You're talking about layoffs." "We're talking about optimization," David Winters corrected. "Eliminating positions that don't directly contribute to revenue generation, streamlining decision-making processes, reducing overhead costs that impact profitability." William always believed that our people were our greatest asset. "William was a visionary," Patricia Morse said, her tone suggesting that being a visionary was somehow a liability. "But he wasn't always practical about the realities of modern business. Shareholders expect returns, and our current operating model isn't sustainable in today's market." Blackwood leaned forward, his expression hardening. "James, we appreciate your loyalty to William's memory, but sentiment isn't a business strategy. We need leaders who understand that difficult decisions are sometimes necessary for long-term success." "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We're asking you to support the board's decision to implement comprehensive operational reforms," Margaret said. "Your position as COO gives you significant influence with employees. We need you to help communicate these changes in a way that minimizes resistance and maintains morale during the transition." I looked around the table, reading the subtext in their expressions. They weren't asking for my support. They were demanding my complicity in destroying the company culture that William had spent decades building. "And if I don't support these reforms?" The silence that followed was heavy with implication. "James," Blackwood said finally, "we hope that won't be necessary. But if you can't embrace the new direction, we'll need to find someone who can." "Are you threatening my position?" "We're clarifying expectations. Harrison Technologies needs leadership that's aligned with board priorities. If you can't provide that leadership, we'll find someone who can." I spent the rest of the meeting listening to their plans in growing horror. Mass layoffs disguised as right-sizing. Elimination of employee benefits that William had considered essential to company culture. Outsourcing of core functions to reduce labor costs. Sale of underperforming divisions without regard for the employees who would lose their jobs. It wasn't business strategy. It was corporate vandalism. "We'll need your answer by Friday," Blackwood said as the meeting concluded. "Full support for the operational reforms, or we'll begin the process of finding new COO leadership." Walking back to my office, I felt sick to my stomach. These people had waited until William was barely cold in the ground before beginning their assault on everything he'd created. They'd timed this perfectly, assuming that I'd be too grief-stricken and professionally vulnerable to resist their ultimatum. That afternoon, I called Harrison Technologies' longtime legal counsel, Robert Martinez, and asked him to meet me for dinner at a restaurant far from the corporate campus. "Robert, I need to ask you about something William gave me. Legal documents related to ownership structure and board authority." Robert's expression grew serious. "James, if this is about what I think it's about, we should discuss it in my office, not in public." "Is it real? The documentation William provided about stock ownership and voting rights? It's absolutely real. William spent 2 years with our firm's best corporate attorneys making sure every detail was legally bulletproof. But James, if you're considering activating those provisions, you need to understand the implications. What kind of implications? Once you exercise majority ownership rights, there's no going back. You'll be in a public battle with some very powerful people who won't hesitate to use every legal and financial weapon at their disposal. That night, I sat in my study reading through William's documents again, this time with full understanding of what he'd given me. Not just insurance against hostile board actions, but the power to completely reshape Harrison Technologies according to his vision rather than theirs. Thursday brought news that confirmed my worst fears about the board's intentions. Linda called me at home to report that several department heads had been asked to prepare reduction in force plans for their teams, with target cuts of 20 to 30% across all divisions. Friday morning, I walked into conference room A knowing exactly what I was going to say. Blackwood didn't waste time with pleasantries. James, we need your decision. Are you prepared to support the board's operational reforms? I looked around the table at the 4 people who thought they held all the power in this room. No, I said simply. I'm not. I see. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but I could see satisfaction in his eyes. In that case, we have no choice but to terminate your employment with Harrison Technologies, effective immediately. You're firing me? We're accepting your resignation, Margaret corrected. Your inability to adapt to new leadership requirements makes your position untenable. I haven't resigned. You have now, David Winters said, sliding a prepared document across the table. Sign this, and you'll receive a generous severance package. Refuse, and you'll leave with nothing but your final paycheck. I picked up the document and pretended to read it, though I already knew what it contained. A resignation letter, a non-disclosure agreement, and a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working in the tech industry for 2 years. This is quite a severance package, I said, noting the 7-figure payment outlined in the agreement. William spoke highly of your contributions, Patricia said. We're prepared to be generous in recognition of your years of service. That's very thoughtful. I set down the document without signing it. But I think there's been a misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? Blackwood asked. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a different set of documents. The ownership papers William had given me, along with updated corporate filings that Robert Martinez had prepared the previous evening. The misunderstanding is about who actually has the authority to fire whom in this company. I placed the documents on the table where everyone could see them. As of yesterday's filing with the Delaware Secretary of State, I own 60% of Harrison Technologies' outstanding common stock. That makes me the majority shareholder, and according to corporate bylaws, gives me the authority to remove board members and corporate officers. The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret was the first to find her voice. That's impossible. William only owned 45% of the company. William transferred his holdings to me over the past 5 years through a series of trust agreements and stock option exercises, all completely legal, all properly documented, all filed with appropriate regulatory agencies. Blackwood's face had gone pale. You can't. This has to be some kind of fraud. I assure you it's not. Robert Martinez from Caldwell. Martinez and Associates can verify the authenticity of all documentation. He helped structure the transfers. David Winters grabbed the papers and began reading frantically. This can't be legal. There are disclosure requirements for major stock transactions. All properly followed. The transfers were structured to stay below disclosure thresholds until the final consolidation, which triggered the filing requirements I met yesterday. Patricia was reading over David's shoulder, her expression growing more alarmed with each page. This gives you voting control of the company. It does indeed. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard where someone had written operational reforms in bold letters across the top. Which brings me to my first official action as majority shareholder. I picked up a marker and drew a line through the words. I'm terminating all discussion of operational reforms. There will be no mass layoffs, no benefit cuts, no sale of divisions, and no destruction of the company culture that William Harrison spent his life building. Blackwood found his voice, though it sounded strained. You can't just... There are contracts, agreements, fiduciary responsibilities to minority shareholders. You're absolutely right about fiduciary responsibilities, which is why my second official action is calling for a vote of no confidence in the current board leadership. I returned to my seat and pulled out another document. This is a formal motion to remove Richard Blackwood as chairman of the board, effective immediately, due to his failure to act in the best interests of the company and its stakeholders. You can't do this, Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. I can, and I am. As majority shareholder, I have the right to call special board meetings and propose leadership changes. The vote will take place Monday morning at 9 a.m. Patricia was reading through corporate bylaws on her phone. He's right. Majority shareholders have broad authority to restructure board leadership. This is a coup, Blackwood said, his composure finally cracking. You're using technicalities to undermine legitimate board governance. I'm using legal ownership rights to protect a company from being destroyed by people who fundamentally misunderstand its value proposition. I gathered my documents and stood up. Again. The severance package you offered me was generous but unnecessary. I won't be leaving Harrison Technologies. However, anyone who can't support the company's continued commitment to employee welfare and innovation culture is welcome to submit their resignation. As I walked toward the door, Blackwood called out one final threat. This won't stand, James. We have investors, legal resources, connections that will make your life very difficult. I paused at the doorway and looked back at the four people who, 30 minutes earlier, had thought they were firing me. Richard, I appreciate the warning, but you should understand something about the man who taught me everything I know about business. William Harrison didn't just build a successful company. He built an empire of loyal employees, satisfied customers, and community partnerships that will support the right kind of leadership. I smiled for the first time since entering the conference room. You came here to strip mine a company for short-term profits. I came here to honor the legacy of someone who understood that sustainable success comes from building something bigger than quarterly earnings reports. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. See you Monday morning for the vote. The weekend between Friday's confrontation and Monday's board meeting was a whirlwind of legal preparation, strategic planning, and damage control. Word of the boardroom showdown had leaked, probably through Margaret, who'd always been uncomfortable with corporate secrecy. And by Saturday morning, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from employees, investors, and business journalists who'd gotten wind of the story. Robert Martinez and I spent most of Saturday in his office, reviewing every aspect of the ownership transfer documents and preparing for the inevitable legal challenges that Blackwood and his allies would mount. The documentation was bulletproof, but Robert wanted to ensure we were ready for any procedural objections or delay tactics they might attempt. James, you need to understand that this is going to get ugly, Robert warned as we reviewed corporate governance procedures. Blackwood's firm has a reputation for aggressive litigation. They'll challenge everything, the validity of the stock transfers, the board meeting procedures, even your fitness to serve as majority shareholder. Can they succeed with any of those challenges? Not based on the law and the documentation, but they can tie things up in court for months, create negative publicity, and make your life miserable while the legal process plays out. What about the employees? If this drags on, what happens to the people Blackwood wants to lay off? That's actually one advantage you have. As long as you maintain voting control, you can block any major operational changes. The mass layoffs can't proceed without board approval, and you control the board votes. Sunday evening, I received an unexpected call from Linda, William's former assistant, who'd been asked to stay on during the leadership transition. Mr. Coleman, I thought you should know. Mr. Blackwood has been calling board members all weekend. He's also scheduled emergency meetings with the company's major investors for tomorrow morning, before the board vote. What kind of meetings? I'm not sure exactly, but I overheard him talking about protecting shareholder interests and preventing hostile internal takeovers. He seems very confident that he can block your actions. After hanging up with Linda, I made my own round of phone calls to key investors and major clients, people who'd worked with William for years and understood the company's real value proposition. I wasn't asking for public support, yet, but I wanted them to hear the truth about what was happening before Blackwood had a chance to spin his version of events. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching the atmosphere in Harrison Technologies' executive offices. I arrived early and went straight to my office, still officially the COO's office since Blackwood's firing attempt had been premature, to review my notes one final time. At 8:30, Linda knocked on my door. "Mr. Coleman? The board members are arriving, and there are several people here I don't recognize." Mr. Blackwood brought what looks like a legal team. "How many lawyers?" "At least 4, plus someone who introduced himself as a representative from his investment firm." I smiled grimly. Blackwood was escalating quickly, which meant he was either very confident or very desperate. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into conference room A to find the largest gathering the room had ever hosted. In addition to the 4 board members, Blackwood had brought 2 lawyers, a representative from his investment firm, and what appeared to be a stenographer to create an official record of the proceedings. "James," Blackwood said without standing, "before we begin, I want you to meet David Carruthers from Steinberg, Carruthers and Associates. He'll be representing the board's interests during these proceedings." Carruthers was a man in his 60s with the predatory confidence of someone who'd spent decades in corporate warfare. "Mr. Coleman, we've reviewed the documents you presented Friday, and we have significant concerns about their validity and your authority to call this meeting." "What kind of concerns?" "First, the stock transfer documents appear to have been executed without proper board oversight. Delaware corporate law requires board approval for any stock transactions above certain thresholds." Robert Martinez, who'd been sitting quietly beside me, opened his briefcase. "Actually, that's incorrect. The transfers were structured as exercise of existing stock options and conversion of convertible preferred shares, both of which are governed by the original investment agreements rather than ongoing board oversight." He handed Carruthers a thick folder. "You'll find all relevant documentation there, including opinions from 3 separate corporate law firms confirming the legality of the transactions." Carruthers reviewed the documents, his confidence visibly diminishing as he read. "Second," he continued, "even if the transfers were legal, Mr. Coleman lacks the corporate governance experience to serve in a leadership role. Installing an unqualified majority shareholder would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty to minority investors. Mr. Coleman has 15 years of experience with this company, including 3 years as Chief Operating Officer," Robert replied. "His qualifications are well documented and have been consistently recognized by the previous board leadership." Margaret Chen spoke up. "James, I want you to know that this isn't personal. We're just trying to protect the company's best interests." "Margaret, what's in the company's best interests? Mass layoffs of loyal employees? Elimination of benefits that attract top talent? Sale of profitable divisions to generate short-term cash?" "We're trying to maximize shareholder value," David Winters said. "That's our fiduciary obligation." "I am the majority shareholder," I replied, "and I'm telling you that destroying the company culture to generate quarterly profits doesn't maximize long-term value." Blackwood leaned forward aggressively. "James, you're letting emotion cloud your business judgment. Harrison Technologies needs modern leadership that understands market realities." William understood market realities perfectly. He also understood that sustainable success comes from building something valuable, not just extracting short-term profits. I stood up and addressed the room formally. "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Richard Blackwood's leadership as chairman of the board. As majority shareholder, I have the authority to propose this motion and to vote my shares in support of it." Carruthers jumped up. "This proceeding is irregular and potentially illegal. We object to any votes taken under these circumstances." "Your objection is noted," Robert said calmly. "But Delaware corporate law is clear about majority shareholder rights and board governance. Mr. Coleman's authority is well established." "I call for a formal vote," I continued. "All in favor of removing Richard Blackwood as chairman of the board?" I raised my hand, representing 60% of the company's voting shares. "Motion carries," Robert announced. "Richard Blackwood is hereby removed from his position as chairman of the board, effective immediately." The room erupted in angry voices as Blackwood and his lawyers protested the proceedings, but the legal reality was undeniable. I controlled the majority of voting shares, which gave me the authority to restructure board leadership. "I nominate myself as interim chairman," I continued, "pending a comprehensive review of board structure and leadership qualifications. Another vote, another victory. I also propose the immediate termination of all operational reform initiatives pending a thorough assessment of their impact on employee welfare and long-term company stability. Blackwood stood up abruptly. This is a farce. We'll challenge every aspect of these proceedings in court. That's your prerogative, I replied. But until those challenges are resolved, I have the legal authority to protect this company from decisions that I believe are harmful to its long-term interests. Margaret looked around the room with an expression of growing concern. James, what happens now? To the board, to the company, to the employees? What happens now is that we return to William Harrison's vision of building sustainable value through innovation, employee development, and customer satisfaction. The mass layoffs are canceled, the benefit cuts are canceled, the division sales are canceled. I looked directly at Blackwood, and anyone who can't support that vision is welcome to submit their resignation. Patricia Morse had been quiet through most of the confrontation, but now she spoke up. James, my investment firm has significant resources tied up in Harrison Technologies. We need assurance that you're not going to make emotional decisions that hurt the company's financial performance. Patricia, I'm going to make the same kinds of decisions that built this company into a billion-dollar enterprise over the past 20 years. If you consider sustainable growth and employee loyalty to be emotional decisions, then we may have fundamentally different views about business strategy. As the meeting broke up, with Blackwood and his team storming out while making threats about legal challenges, Margaret approached me privately. James, I want you to know that I wasn't completely comfortable with the operational reforms. Some of the proposed cuts seemed excessive. Then why didn't you speak up during the planning? Richard can be very persuasive, and the financial projections were compelling. But seeing this confrontation, I'm starting to wonder if we lost sight of what made this company successful in the first place. That afternoon, I called an all-hands meeting to address the rumors and speculation that had been circulating since Friday's boardroom showdown. Standing in the main auditorium, looking out at more than 800 employees who worked at the corporate campus, I felt the weight of responsibility that William had carried for so many years. I know there have been questions about leadership changes and operational reforms, I began. I want to be clear about what's happening and what you can expect going forward. I explained the ownership structure, the board leadership changes, and most importantly, the cancellation of the proposed layoffs and benefit cuts. Harrison Technologies was built on the principle that our people are our greatest asset. That hasn't changed, and it won't change as long as I have anything to say about it. The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, and I realized that the employees had been more worried about the proposed reforms than anyone had. Acknowledged. During the Q&A session, a senior software engineer asked the question I'd been expecting. What about the investors who wanted the operational reforms? Won't they cause problems for the company? Some investors may be unhappy with our decision to prioritize long-term stability over short-term profit maximization, I replied. But the company's financial performance speaks for itself. We're profitable, growing, and well-positioned for continued success. Any investor who doesn't appreciate that is welcome to sell their shares. That evening, as I sat in what had been William's office, my office now, I reflected on the strange series of events that had brought me to this moment. 48 hours earlier, I'd been an employee facing termination. Now I was the controlling owner of a billion-dollar company, responsible for the livelihoods of thousands of people. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Robert Martinez. James, I wanted to give you a heads up. Blackwood's legal team filed for an emergency injunction to block your board actions. They're claiming the stock transfers were fraudulent and that you're not legally entitled to majority shareholder status. How strong is their case? Legally? Very weak. The documentation is bulletproof, and Delaware courts generally uphold properly executed stock transfers. But they're also filing in the court of public opinion. Expect negative media coverage portraying you as someone who used legal technicalities to steal control of the company. Let them try. The employees know what really happened here, and so do our customers and long-term investors. That's probably true. But James, you should prepare for this to get ugly before it gets better. Blackwood has a lot of resources and a reputation for fighting dirty. After hanging up with Robert, I walked to the window overlooking the Harrison Technologies campus. Hundreds of cars in the parking lot, representing hundreds of families who depended on this company for their livelihood. research labs where engineers were developing innovations that would improve healthcare and education, customer service centers where representatives were solving problems for clients around the world. This was what William had built. This was what he'd entrusted to me. And this was what I'd spend whatever time I had left protecting from people who saw it only as numbers on a balance sheet. On my desk sat a framed photo of William and me from the company's 15th anniversary celebration. He was smiling, his arm around my shoulders, both of us looking toward a future we thought we'd be building together. I picked up the photo and spoke to the empty office. "I kept my promise, William. I've got this now." The first salvo in Blackwood's counterattack came Tuesday morning in the form of a Wall Street Journal article titled, "Corporate Coup at Harrison Technologies Raises Governance Questions." The piece, clearly sourced from Blackwood's team, portrayed me as an opportunistic insider who'd exploited a grieving company's vulnerability to seize control through dubious legal maneuvers. Sources close to the Harrison Technologies board describe a systematic campaign by Chief Operating Officer James Coleman to accumulate voting shares. Through questionable stock transfers executed without proper oversight, the article read. The timing of Coleman's power grab, coming just days after CEO William Harrison's funeral, has raised concerns about corporate governance and minority shareholder protections. The article was carefully crafted to suggest impropriety without making specific accusations that could be legally challenged. It quoted unnamed board members expressing serious concerns about my fitness for leadership and my emotional state following William's death. Linda brought me a copy of the journal along with a stack of other business publications that had picked up the story. "Mr. Coleman, the phone hasn't stopped ringing. Business reporters, investment analysts, even some employees asking if the stories are true." What kind of questions are the employees asking? Mostly whether their jobs are still secure, whether the company is really stable, whether you're qualified to run things. I spent the morning crafting a company-wide email that addressed the media coverage without getting drawn into a public fight with Blackwood's team. The key was reassuring employees and customers while avoiding statements that could be twisted by hostile media coverage. "As you may have seen in recent business media reports," I wrote, "Harrison Technologies is experiencing a leadership transition following William Harrison's passing. I want to assure all employees that the company remains financially strong, operationally stable, and committed to the values and culture that have made us successful." I included specific commitments about maintaining employment levels, preserving benefits, and continuing investment in research and development. A clear signal that the operational reforms were permanently canceled. By Wednesday, Blackwood's legal challenge was making headlines in tech industry publications. His lawyers had filed a comprehensive lawsuit in Delaware Chancery Court, challenging the validity of the stock transfers and seeking to void my appointment as board chairman. The complaint alleges that William Harrison was mentally incapacitated during the period when the stock transfers were executed, Robert Martinez explained during our Wednesday afternoon strategy meeting. They're claiming he wasn't competent to make major financial decisions due to his illness. That's ridiculous. William was sharp right up until the end. His oncologist can confirm that the cancer treatments didn't affect his cognitive abilities. I know, and we'll be able to prove that. But it's a clever legal strategy because it forces us to litigate William's mental state rather than just the paperwork. It makes the case more emotionally complex and gives them opportunities to generate negative publicity. How long will this take to resolve? Probably 6 to 12 months for a final resolution. But we can request expedited proceedings given the impact on company operations. That afternoon brought another challenge in the form of a surprise visit from Patricia Morse and 2 representatives from her investment firm. They'd requested an emergency meeting to discuss investor concerns about the leadership changes. "James, we appreciate that you're trying to honor William's memory," Patricia began. "But our firm has a fiduciary responsibility to our limited partners. The operational reforms that Richard proposed would have significantly improved the company's profit margins and return on investment. At the cost of laying off 30% of the workforce and eliminating benefits that help us attract top talent. Sometimes difficult decisions are necessary for long-term competitiveness," said one of her colleagues, a man in his 40s who introduced himself as a managing partner. "The technology sector is extremely dynamic, and companies that don't optimize their cost structures get left behind. This company has been profitable and growing consistently for 20 years by focusing on innovation and employee development. What evidence do you have that changing that approach would improve performance?" Patricia pulled out a tablet and began showing me financial projections. Our analysis suggests that the operational reforms would have increased annual profits by 40 to 60% within 2 years. I reviewed the projections, noting the assumptions about productivity improvements and cost reductions that seemed wildly optimistic. These projections assume that laying off experienced employees won't impact productivity or customer satisfaction. They assume that eliminating benefits won't hurt our ability to recruit top talent. They assume that our competitors won't take advantage of our internal disruption to steal market share. Those are manageable risks, the managing partner said dismissively. Have you ever actually run a technology company? Have you managed software development teams or maintained client relationships during major workforce reductions? The question clearly annoyed him. We've overseen operational improvements at dozens of portfolio companies. The principles are consistent across industries. The principles of destroying company culture to generate short-term profits might be consistent, but the actual impact varies enormously based on industry dynamics and competitive positioning. The meeting continued for another hour, with Patricia's team making increasingly aggressive arguments about their rights as minority investors and their expectations for return on investment. It became clear that they viewed Harrison Technologies purely as a financial asset to be optimized for maximum extraction value. James, Patricia said as the meeting concluded, I hope you'll reconsider your position on operational reforms. Our investment firm has been very supportive of Harrison Technologies, but that support depends on responsible financial management. What exactly are you saying, Patricia? I'm saying that if this company doesn't generate appropriate returns for investors, we'll be forced to explore other options for protecting our investment. What kind of options? There are always buyers interested in acquiring undervalued technology assets, companies that understand how to optimize operations for maximum profitability. The threat was clear. Support the operational reforms, or face a hostile takeover attempt from someone who would implement them anyway. That evening, I had dinner with Susan Walsh, Harrison Technologies' Chief Technology Officer and one of Williams' most trusted lieutenants. Susan had been with the company for 12 years and understood both the technical and cultural aspects of what made us successful. James, I want you to know that the engineering teams are solidly behind you, she said over our appetizers. The operational reforms would have been devastating for our ability to attract and retain top talent. How are people handling the uncertainty? The media coverage has been pretty negative. The engineers are pragmatic about business realities, but they also understand what this company means to them professionally. Most of our senior developers have been recruited by competitors multiple times, but they stay here because of the culture and the interesting work. And if we'd implemented the operational reforms, we would have lost our best people within 6 months. The benefit cuts alone would have triggered a mass exodus to companies that value employee welfare. Susan paused, choosing her words carefully. James, there's something else you should know. During the past few weeks, while William was in the hospital, several team leads reported being approached by recruiters from other companies. Aggressive recruitment campaigns targeting our specific employees. Friday afternoon brought news that felt like complete vindication. Linda rushed into my office with a printout showing Harrison Technologies' stock price had jumped 12% following the board restructuring. The market likes decisive leadership, she said with a smile. Investors were more worried about ongoing uncertainty than specific outcomes. That evening, my phone rang. Robert Martinez had news about Blackwood's lawsuit. James, Blackwood's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss their own case. They're dropping the legal challenge completely. What changed? Their legal team finally reviewed all documentation thoroughly and realized they had no chance of success. Fighting a losing battle in Delaware Chancery Court is expensive and embarrassing. After hanging up, I walked to the window overlooking the Harrison Technologies campus. The parking lot was still full past 7 p.m., employees engaged and committed rather than worried about job security. This was what William had envisioned when he'd transferred ownership to me. Not just legal control, but stewardship of a community building something meaningful together. I picked up the photo of William and me from the desk. I kept my promise, I said to the empty office. I've got this now. The easy part was winning control of the company. The hard part would be proving I deserved it.